Dr. Karim Dajani is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst with a specialization in working with issues related to cultural dislocation and displacement. His research and writing includes publications on the links between cultural systems and the unconscious of individuals and groups. He sits on the editorial board of the International Journal of Applied Psychoanalytic Studies. His recent works include a special issue dedicated to the social unconscious and an upcoming chapter on race and ethnicity in contemporary psychoanalytic theories and praxis that will appear in the next edition of the textbook on psychoanalysis. Everybody, Dr. Dajani.
Hi, very nice to be here with you all. CIIS is one of my alma maters, so it's nice to be back. Let's see, it's a very ambitious day today, and there's a few things that I want to start with to kind of put things in context in terms of why I'm going in the direction I'm going. So I'm Karim Dajani. I was born in Lebanon to Palestinian refugees in the late 1960s. And I lived through a civil war in Lebanon and a couple of Israeli invasions before I came to the United States. So the issue, coming to the United States as an immigrant, there were a couple of issues that were very much part of my experiential horizon, part of the things that were troubling me as a person. The first one had to do with something that hadn't been really thought through very well in psychology that I came to name cultural dislocation, which is really a kind of a psychosocial difficulty in living that happens when you try to live your life in between two cultures or immerse yourself in a culture that's quite different from your original culture. And the psychology literature and the sort of psychology theorizing didn't really have a place for that or a conception that articulated that. So that was one of the things that I was dealing with. The other thing that I was dealing with is that, unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, I come from a large group of Palestinians that are generally hated in the West, you know, for very, very complicated reasons that don't really have to do anything with who we are as people or our culture or essence, due to some very complicated geopolitical forces. And so I had two problems in addition to the problems that you normally have as with living, like, narcissism and, rage and, self-hatred, just the normal sundry of things that we all suffer from. I had these two additional things that I was suffering from, which is cultural dislocation and how groups work, how you get assigned a group, how groups look at groups, what happens between groups, because my identity as a Palestinian is a group identity, and it seemed to be quite provocative and evocative as I tried to live here. So that's sort of like the context that I sought psychoanalytic treatment and psychoanalytic training. And in my training, which started in the early 2000s, I learned a lot about classical psychoanalysis or a vein of psychoanalysis, but nothing about cultural dislocation, being hated by a large group, how culture worked even. And much of the position that was taken in psychoanalysis at that time is that, culture is outside of the unconscious. It's external. So it's not part of the purview of psychoanalysis, which, hit my body wrong. And I really felt that that was incorrect. So I started thinking about it for myself to try to figure out what it was. And I was able to put some things together that were very, very helpful to me, basically about how cultural structures the unconscious and how cultural dislocation works, which was, my own self-analysis, extremely helpful. In the process, I discovered that there was a very interesting history within psychoanalysis on the very ideas that I had just thought originated, thought that I just made up of thin air. And I was very impressed with myself. When I did the research, it turned out that the ideas are there, had been there for, you know, really clearly articulated for at least 100 years. But they never made it into the curricula, into the classroom, into the general kind of working memory of the group, to the culture of the group. I thought that was really interesting. So I did a deep dive. Oh, one thing before, we're gonna just be real and natural. Just go back and forth and have lacunae and so on. Anyway, when I was doing my training, you know, I had a lot of trouble because there were some problems that I really needed help with that weren't being addressed or seen. They were misrecognized generally. They were all about, you know. And so, and the theories that we were learning were very interesting, but they none of them really worked for me. You know, like I wasn't sure if I really wanted to fuck my mother and kill my father and so on. Like I just didn't, I wasn't really, they didn't quite work for me. But there was one theorist whose work really helped a lot because it didn't violate things that I knew were right or I knew were true for me. And that theorist was Bion. And I really didn't know really why I thought Bion was so helpful to me, or his view of the mind was so capacious that it could really kind of be applied in different cultural contexts in a way that, you know, was really clinically relevant. I didn't understand that. So today I'm gonna take you through a little bit of my personal journey in terms of how I came to think about the social unconscious, how I came to think about Bion, and how I came to think about the link between, you know, the social unconscious and Bion. Okay? So far, so good. And I was thinking about doing it in a way that, you know, I have, this is the first time I do slides because I'm trying to like evolve and look more legit, you know what I'm saying? Particularly that, you know, these days you got to look legit. And so, you know, the slides contain a lot of condensed thoughts. I'm going to read them and talk about them, but I want this to be a little bit interactive in the sense that when I'm presenting the slides, if you have comments or questions about the meaning of what I'm saying, please ask so that we can, you know, make sure that we all have sort of the ideas together and we're sharing them by the time we get to the cases. Yeah? So a little bit. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, then we'll hit slide 4. So psychoanalysis is about the unconscious, basically. And the modern version of psychoanalysis that we're familiar with began in Europe in the 1880s. And I say the modern version because there are ancient versions of psychoanalysis, meaning the study of the unconscious. Most notably, there are Sufi systems of self-realization that very much account for the unconscious and for the need for interpretation, have a model of mind that is ridiculously similar to Freud's that was synthesized, you know, a couple of thousand years ago. Buddhism also has a psychological system. So modern psychoanalysis, modern Eurocentric psychoanalysis. I'm going to focus on some players to make my point. Clearly Freud, Jung, which most of you are familiar with, Burrow, who's an unsung hero, and by the end of this workshop, I hope to turn you into passionate lovers of Burrow. The interpersonal cultural school that evolved within the North American tradition, mostly in New York, that now is really represented in the institutes like the William Alanson White Institute, and that kind of stuff. Klein, Bion, and Pichon-Rivière. Okay? By the time we're done, you're going to be so familiar with all of these. All right. So every psychoanalyst, I think, on the planet says the unconscious is real. If you don't think the unconscious is real, you can't get a ticket. You have to believe that the unconscious is real for you to be a psychoanalyst. Okay, so far so good. So we're all good. Yeah, but then the question becomes, what's in the unconscious and how does it work? And there we have divisions. Yeah? And we're still debating this question. And this question of what's in the unconscious and how its work has become a very divisive question rather than a scientific one. And I just want to put a question out there. Why are disagreements about the contents and functions of the unconscious so emotionally fraught? Why do we think the other side is so stupid and inferior to us? All right. So if we can put up slide 4. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these different distinctions or divisions, just so we can have them in mind. So there's 3 early threads or distinctions about how the unconscious works. Freud really thought the unconscious is the depository of instinctual impulses, mostly sex and violence, and unwanted thoughts. Basically, memories of trauma, basically, that we've repressed. And the unconscious is sexual and aggressive in nature. So that's one thread. Then there's thread number 2, which is Jung. Jung agreed with Freud, but thought the main drivers of the unconscious were archetypes, things that were archetypes, collective experiences, and something akin to a spiritual or transcendent aim. He didn't think that the unconscious was all about sex. But really important to understand this. Bion's collective unconscious is universal. It's a very important thing. It's universal. Just like Freud's unconscious is universal. Okay? So that's, okay. Burrow was analyzed by Jung in 1910. Burrow met Jung and Freud when they gave a lecture at Clark University, and he was enamored. And then he went to Zurich and did a straining analysis with Jung and came back to the United States anyway, and brought psychoanalysis back to the United States. I'll talk some more about that. So agree with both of them, but focus on dimensions of the unconscious that had to do with culture and the transcendent. And he coined the term the social unconscious in 1924 in a paper called Social Images versus Reality. He's the guy that coined it. And so we have 3 distinctions here we should keep in mind about how the unconscious work. We have a dynamic dimension, which means that the things that we're in conflict about and we can't really know because they overwhelmed us, we repress or we put in the dynamic unconscious. Dynamic unconscious is about conflict. The things that we're conflicted about and we need to put out of awareness, we put in the dynamic unconscious, and there's always pressure to keep things in there. The collective unconscious is about our universal, it's about the history of man as it's encoded in every mind. Okay, so every mind has archetypes and the history of man that is encoded in it, or at least, and in that way it's universal. And then we have the social unconscious, which is ethnic and regional. Yeah, the social unconscious is ethnic and regional, and that is the place where culture is organized, and there are differences that stem from the groups and the cultures we come from are organized. And so the social unconscious is different. Okay? So we have some things that are universal and some things that by definition are variable. They're not the same. Good? All right, so Burrow. Let's talk about Burrow a little bit. So in 1875 to 1950, he was born in Virginia. He studied literature, then medicine, then psychology. Got a PhD in psychology from Johns Hopkins in 1909. He worked in state hospitals with the insane, met Freud and Jung in 1910, did his analysis in Zurich, brought psychoanalysis back to the United States and trained the people who later became the pioneers of interpersonal psychoanalysis, like Fromm and Sullivan and Clara Thompson and so on. Became the president of the American Psychoanalytic Institute in 1925, and he was expelled from psychoanalysis in 1932. In 1921, Burrow was challenged by one of his analysans, Clarence Shields, with regard to the inherently authoritarian role of psychoanalysis. And in trying to work that out with his analysan, they agreed to a mutual analysis. So Burrow was the first to experiment in mutual analysis. It was not Ferenczi. So when he did that, and he laid on the couch and Clarence sat in the chair and analyzed them, it came as a shock to Burrow when he realized that in individual application, the analytic attitude and the authoritarian attitude cannot be separated. And so he started to think that your position in the group determines what you can and cannot see. There's no position that sees everything. The position defines what you see, just like, you know, the measuring instrument defines what you see. And Einstein was just published, the theory of special and general relativity. So he was very interested in it, and he refers to it a lot. And he thought that applying Einstein's relativity to the field of psychology would compel us to account for our relative position in relation to the relative position of the person that we are trying to understand. What does that mean? Account for your relative position in relation to the relative position to the person you're trying to understand. It means, in this case, by the end, if I ask that question, you don't know I failed, but now it's okay. It means that you account for your social unconscious, and you account for the person's social unconscious, because the social unconscious gives us a perspective that is relative. Yeah, we see the world from a certain point of view, and they see the world from a certain point of view, and that point of view is not individual. It's a group point of view that is reproduced in every individual. I'm going to get to that in a second, okay? So accounting for your relative position is accounting for the fact that you have a social unconscious, you're cultured in a certain way, you're using certain ideas to understand the world, and these are relative. They're not absolute. Your point of view is not nature. Feel me? Okay? Okay. So as he was doing this work, Burrow recognized the centrality of the group, and the social conventions that shape what we see and how we act became evident to him. So it became evident to him that the group and its norms were very much part of the mind. They're not external things. All right? He coined the terms social unconscious and group therapy, by the way. He was the first one to do group therapy. He coined the term group therapy. It's good to know. I feel really bad for him because I can't believe it. He started the MDR. He started everything that we're now into. And like the dude was just, it doesn't deserve it. And group therapy began the first group therapy project under an organization he started called the Lifwin Foundation for Laboratory Research and Analytic and Social Psychiatry. This was in the early 1920s. Okay? He devoted his attention to the physiological substructures of harmonious and rivaling participants within groups and societies, but also between states. Let's think about that. The physiological substructure of harmonious or rivaling interactions. Yeah? You hook up people to electrodes and measure the electricity and says, these waves are harmonious, these waves are rivalrous. And so encourage people to hold their bodies in a way that was more receptive to the external world based on some science that he was trying to figure out. And that research became the basis of what's known today as EMDR. Yeah, Trigant Burrow. How many people had heard of Trigant Burrow before today? Okay, that's a tragedy. But it's not your fault. It really is not your fault. I mean, genuinely. Yeah, I saw that, which is good. Those are the people that we need to take out of the group now. All right. Okay, the social unconscious is about our differences, and its analysis is required. So this is Burrow. I'm going to give you some Burrow now. We're just going to go through some Burrow, okay? It's about our differences. We're all different. And its analysis is required to realize the commonality of our being. The guy went spiritual. Yeah, so that was part of the reason why I got cut out. He thought of our consciousness as a unitary source, one God, that is the common basis of our humanity. Yeah, he thought this really nice. It is fractured. This realization of the commonality of humanity is fractured by trauma, yeah, and by the illusion of absolutism that suffuses the social unconscious. He wrote this in 1920. What does that mean? We're all racists, okay? We all think that our thoughts are more valuable than other people's thoughts. It's a really terrible human quirk. But it can be analyzed. You know, it can be transformed. But if you don't know it, you can't pay attention to it. He thought, okay, so far so good. So the social unconscious, I believe, and this is a university, so if I'm wrong, please do let me know. I really believe that the term social unconscious was coined in this article, Social Images versus Reality, in a rudimentary sketch of the functions that social unconscious were laid out there. So I'm going to go through them today. The unconscious is largely, he tells us, that the unconscious is largely structured by social images. They are shared ideas about reality and morality. So these images that we all share and we think we know what they mean are like the church, fashion, money, gender, God, immigrants, honor. Get what I'm saying? We all have shared ideas about what these things mean and how to apply them to understand what's going on. And so the social unconscious or culture is made up of a set of shared ideas and images and propositions that we all use unconsciously to organize our experience and generate meaning. All right? And in that way, we all have a code in us, and the codes that are in us link us back to the groups that we come from. Bueno? And he noticed that the social unconscious resists being analyzed. It has a resistance that's built into it. So, more Burrow. We use our shared ideas and images to symbolize our experiences. In other words, our self-perception is made up of ideas and images that are social in nature. So what does it mean that we use shared ideas to symbolize? So something very close. Yes. So let's say 100 years ago, the word man, the word woman, word homosexual, let's say. What did they mean 100 years ago? The shared ideas. Man, superior. Woman, passive, inferior, deficient. What was the third thing I said? Homosexuals, like 100 years ago, right? So these are shared ideas. There's the group's ideas. They go into all of us. And then they reproduced in the way that we think about ourselves. You know what I'm saying? This is a big idea. It's a really simple idea, but if you really take it in, it'll disrupt your life forever. So if you need to resist, I understand. I really do. We think with the ideas of the group. And it's very difficult to stand outside of that. In fact, it is the exception, not the norm. We think with the ideas of the group. All of us. Even here. The group has some shared ideas. You know, every group. This is not a criticism. This is not a criticism. This is just how it is. It's a starting point. Okay. Our self is imbricated or tied to the mother image, self, other, object relations. I think he started object relations too, but I'm not just going to go too far on it. But okay. But when you read it, look at it. Like he's really talking about object relations, but I gave it decline in this today because I don't want to disrupt the world too much. But he then asks, what is the nature of the mother image? And he answers thus. This is Burrow talking. We observe the outline. This is Burrow from this paper. We observe the outlines of this early implanted image, and what is called the mother image is but the sum of the impressions reflected by the mother from the social environment about her, and that these impressions are again transmitted by us to others through their reflection within ourselves. Stay with me, he's a terrible writer, but stay with me. Much of the confusion, this is all Burrow, much of the confusion of psychoanalysis, he tells us, is due to our failure to realize that there is this distinction between the mother image and the mother organism. With the social mind, the important image is the immediate community about it. So the social mind, the image is a group. The community occupies the central position within the social unconscious that the mother image occupies within the individual unconscious. So the individual unconscious, there's a person, and in the social unconscious, there's a group. Yeah? Part of our mind. Thus, it would seem that the community is but the projection or extension within the social unconscious of the mother image within the individual unconscious. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, 11. That's a beautiful question, right? Because it goes to the heart of something that's really hard to understand.
I think it's a problem I've been trying to. There is something.
Yes. So my mother is Palestinian. Yeah. She has Palestinian social unconscious. A mother archetype erases the Palestinian part. Okay. Please try to understand that. Your mother is, I don't know, or whatever she is, you know, whatever, culturally. I'm talking about the group that she comes from, you know. So she's so she belongs to the archetype mother, but then there's another thing that's going on that defines it, animates it, directs it, structures it, shapes it.
German grandmother, Jewish grandmother.
Yeah. They're not the same grandmother. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yes.
I have a question. So how about the terminology of motherland? Or where would that fit in terms of the mother image?
Beautiful. So the motherland. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So the motherland, what's the motherland? The motherland, as far as I can tell, is a place and a group. That's the motherland, yeah? So my mother, and she's not special, but you know, she is, but she's not. But not, I'm not saying there's something special about her. My mother has a tie to Jerusalem, which is her motherland, and to the people of Palestine, which is her group. So if you say motherland, for me, you're saying an individual has a tie to a group and a place and a system of meaning making inside of them. Yeah, and it initially came from the outside. Like all of that came from the outside. She wasn't born Palestinian. You know what I mean? She was just born a human with originary potential, and she was shaped by the group, just like everybody else. You get what I'm saying? So we're not born one way, we're made that way as soon as we come into the world. We are cultured from our first interaction with the world. And in that way, we're all different. And that's beautiful. And some, you know, that's not the problem. Problem is superiority. Well, anyway. So in 1927, Burrow published this book, The Social Basis of Consciousness, and it was then that Freud kicked him out. He was done with him. And he told him that he couldn't make it through the introduction of the book because he thought that it was unintelligible. And then he sent Ernest Jones on a ship to come to New York City and put a committee together to erase him. And so they kicked him out. He was the president of the National Institution of Psychoanalysis. They kicked him out, and then they washed out his scholarship entirely. That's fact, not fiction. Anyway, so Burrow accepted all Freud had to say about the dynamic unconscious, but thought it represented a very small part of the picture. He defined the unconscious as structured by arbitrary social systems or cultures. So that's the social unconscious. So the unconscious, social unconscious is structured by the group and the system that it's suffused in, imprints it. The group and the shared system of meaning making. So I call cultures shared systems of meaning making, or one of the ways that I refer to them, are psychic structures. They are internalized and reproduced in individuals. Yeah? So the shared system of meaning making, the culture, is a psychic structure, not just a set of ideas, but a set of structures inside that guide you from within. And this way culture is both external and internal. It's both a group thing and an individual thing. He thought the analysis of the social unconscious was necessary for seeing the underlying commonality of our existence, right? He had this idea that we are all one. God is one. The social unconscious is where our cultural differences are organized. We went through that. Culture is necessary, arbitrary, and misleading. Culture is necessary, arbitrary, and misleading. It's necessary because we have to have shared ideas to make meaning together. Otherwise, we can't think together. So it's absolutely necessary. It's arbitrary in that the shared ideas are made up by the group and they can change. You know, 100 years ago, homosexuality. 100 years later, it's very different. 100 years ago, men. 100 years later, very different. 100 years ago, black. 100 years later, not so different, but different, a little different. Lipser is different, but some difference, yeah?
Same with men.
Same with men, same with man, same with women. Yeah, right? So they're arbitrary. They're not natural truths. They're things, consensual truths. Yeah, the things that we decide are right. And those can change. There is hope.
What about things like, you remember last week, Tim Kim talked about how when he was growing up, his mother did not love Korea. She hated it. And
We got a request.
Thank you.
okay, sorry. I'm just talking about like when things change. Okay, so I'm talking about when things change, when Tim was saying that when he was growing up, his mother hated Korea, and so he internalized that. And then suddenly she started saying how much she loves Korea, and he felt betrayed, like, what, where was this while I was growing up? So he sort of had identified with this earlier thing. And then I was telling somebody yesterday that when I was growing up, my mother didn't take any medicine. So, you know, like when I first got married, I had a headache. My husband said, why don't you take some Advil? And I said, it's not that kind of headache. And he said, every headache's that kind of headache.
Right.
But, and then my mother said, like, oh, I don't think like that anymore. You should take some Advil. And I felt betrayed too. So what is that where are you saying like that internal and external, like people can change in that way, or?
I mean, there's a couple of things you're putting in there, but like, which we'll get to, like, I'm gonna get to soon, but yes. That cultural dislocation, I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, produces a symptom of self-hatred, often. And so she taught him to be dislocated. And apparently over time, her need for that lessened. And so, and probably it lessened because the group because America hates her more than, you know,
And also America loves Korea more than it used to also.
Right, in a certain way, or a certain Korea, yeah. I don't know about the feeling betrayed. Maybe it's something more about the dynamic. Anyway, thanks, Clara. All right. All right, and it's misleading. Culture is always misleading because it always asserts itself as a natural position. It lies to you all the time, rather than an arbitrary position. Yeah, so it's misleading. So this is my stuff on culture. Yeah, we have some time. So far, so good. It's not too boring. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of my ideas on culture and what I put together. Not my ideas, what I put together. So culture as a structuring structure in the mind of individuals. What's a structuring structure? A structuring structure is predisposed to function as a structured structure. Okay, a structuring structure is something that keeps reproducing itself. It's a structuring structure. These words come from, they're not mine, they come from Pierre Bourdieu. So a structuring structure is predisposed to function as a structured structure. That's how he defines habitus. So basically that there's certain ideas that keep reproducing. So culture shapes how we see things, how we think, and how we behave. We reproduce shared ideas in our most intimate thoughts and images of self and other. So by the time there's an image in your head, it's already cultured. There's no image that stands outside of culture. As this idea was being worked out, Freud rejected it, kicked out Burrow. He wanted to make the unconscious synonymous with repression, meaning he wanted to make it about conflict. The social unconscious, on the other hand, is not about conflict, right? So it's unconscious, but not repressed. You feel me? It's not about conflict, because it just goes into us as a set of tools. It becomes conflictual later. So in 1923, Freud said the following. Just stay with me, okay? Because this is fun. This is fun. I'm having fun. We have two kinds of unconscious. 1923, Ego and the Id, chapter 2, page 18. The one which is latent, but capable of becoming conscious, and the one which is repressed and which is not in itself and without more ado capable of becoming conscious. All of you understand that, right? There's certain ideas that we can will our way into remembering, and then there's certain ideas we can't. So one is called latent, the one that we can will our way into, and the other one is called dynamic, which we can't. It's being put down. As the analysis proceeds, however, Freud discovers yet a third type of unconscious, one that he recognizes as important, quote, we recognize that the unconscious does not coincide with the repressed, right? It is still true that all that is repressed is unconscious, but not all that is unconscious is repressed. Stay with me. A part of the ego, too, heaven knows how important a part may be unconscious, undoubtedly is unconscious. So he discovered that the ego, or what we take ourselves, is suffused in an unconscious that is not repressed. And he said, I think this is a very important thing to account for. And then he ignored it. That was the last he mentioned it. So it turns out, from what I think, is that that unconscious that is not repressed, that suffuses the ego, is in fact the social unconscious. Yeah? You see how it fits? Just hand the glove. And it also fits because that he didn't recognize its importance because Freud wanted to get away from the variable. He wanted to stay with the universal. And he wanted a theory of mind that was universal. I know who you are, just like I know who you are, just like I know. There's no difference, right? So the social unconscious says, no, 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 no. There are huge differences between people, structurally. And he really had trouble with that. He kept on cutting it out. He kept on cutting out the people that were pointing to it. But you can't make reality by insisting on it. You know what I mean? He told us that. You can't. When we find ourselves thus confronted by the necessity of postulating a third unconscious, this is Freud talking, which is not repressed, we must admit that the characteristic of being unconscious begins to lose significance for us. It becomes a quality which can and have many meanings, a quality which we are unable to make, as we should have hoped to do, the basis of far-reaching and inevitable conclusions. Nevertheless, we must beware of ignoring this characteristic. And then bye-bye. Okay, I'm a little bit worried about time. Just okay. Let me just last thing. Then we'll talk about Bion. Slide 16. So in doing this research, this is again just because I'm excited, your university, so I'm going to share it with you. I discovered that we keep on reproducing the same ideas without knowing because they're necessary, right? So I reproduced Burrow's definition of the social unconscious without knowing. I'd never seen him because it was necessary. And in the 1930s, this is really interesting, so I'm going to read it to you. And between the 1930s and 1960s, after they kicked out Burrow, there was a group in America that started to work on this, which are known as the Interpersonal Cultural School, and a group, unbeknownst to anybody, in Egypt that was working on the same thing. They clearly didn't know about each other. They had no links. The group in Egypt was working in Arabic. The group in New York was working in English. And here's the deal. Let me see here. So you guys read it? So they developed two, where am I? So the group in New York, I can't, my reading, it's too complicated here. The group in New York, or one of the groups, named themselves the Integrationists. And they said that the American group, the Western group, that we needed to modify Freud to include the impact of culture. So they suggested a tripart model of mind that was self, object, and community. And they called that the Integrationist, right? Or I might be getting them wrong. But in Egypt, they were reading Freud, and they wanted to make certain corrections to include the things that the theory of Freud wasn't addressing. So they made a model that was a four-sided model that was self, object, community, and God. And they thought that experience cohered in a four-sided, not a three-sided space that included a transcendent dimension. This is in the 1930s. Wouldn't that be cool if we learned that as we were learning about psychoanalysis? Okay, so these models were generated by groups of analysts from different cultures who speak different languages, living in different societies. Nevertheless, they synthesize the same ideas. All right, I really need to get to Bion. Okay, so here's what I'm going to suggest for you. When you say, when we use the word social unconscious at this point, and for the scholarship that you're going to generate, think of the social unconscious as an umbrella term. As an umbrella term that houses all of the scholarship that attempts to articulate the link between the group, culture, and the individual. Yeah? So the social unconscious, umbrella term, and then the scholarships that articulate the different functions and contents of it are sort of its elaborations. So I just brought you 6 of them today just to look at. So Pichon Riviere's idea of an ensemble object as an integral part of our object relations would be an example of that. You get that? Sociogeny, the way that basically colonial society injects the feeling of inferiority in people of color would be another example of work on the social unconscious. The semiotic codes, meaning that, I described that. Lynn Layton's normative unconscious, that we're always being pulled on the inside to comply with the social images of the group. She calls normative unconscious. Guralnick's idea of interpolation, that the ideology of the group spellbinds us and goes into us in certain ways that organize us from the inside. My notion of an ego's habitus are examples of specific iterations of the social unconscious category of experience. Okay. So culture structures the ego. The shared code or habitus structures the ego's nucleus, according to me, a nucleus that is suffused in the unconscious that's not repressed. We talked about that. Cultural dislocation fractures the ego's nucleus. The loss of place and ideals can lead to serious psychological symptoms. Groups are organized by different cultures. Having to live one's life in a different culture from the ones already acquired can lead to a lot of pain, psychologically. Cultural dislocation is serious. Its main symptoms are anhedonia. It's like you're moving through the world with prosthetics. Can't really feel things. Sense of meaninglessness that comes from the diminishment of feeling, and a really complicated experience of self-hatred. All right, Wilfred. How am I going to do this? All right, Wilfred. So Bion, let's talk about Bion. So far, so good? All right, Bion. Lived 80 years, good life. Bion was born in Mathura, India, in the Punjab region, the north, in 1897, okay? A melting pot of religious and cultural diversity, Mathura was the birthplace of Lord Krishna, they tell us. Hindus, Christians, Jains, Muslims inhabited the town and lived in relative harmony, according to ChatGPT. Bion's father was a tiger hunter, tough guy, irrigation specialist who worked for the Raj. He was largely absent. His mother was described as a depressed and withdrawn English woman. He was raised by an ayah, a nanny, an Indian woman who loved him, and he loved her deeply. At the age of 9, he was shipped to a boarding school and separated from her in India. He never returned. Yeah? So Bion struggled with the transition. He called it the susura, the break, the cut between his eastern and western parts of his mind. Nevertheless, he excelled. He was athletic and disciplined and good looking and, you know, whatever. He was a tank commander in World War I. And many of the people that were under his command died before his eyes. He became a surgeon under the guidance of a guy called Wilfred Trotter. And Trotter is important because Trotter in 1908 read Freud and said, hey, I think you're missing something. And this thing that you're missing is called the social instinct. And you're missing how to account for people being horde animals because the group is inseparable from the person. This is 1908. So Trotter influenced Bion's interest in groups. His first work was in groups. Okay, he became an analyst. And he was in a lot of pain. I mean, Bion's theory is all about pain. You know, we have pain and we use our minds to either face it and transform it or run away from it. If we run away from it, we stop learning and we have symptoms. If we face it, we'll have a lot of pain, but a sense of engagement and aliveness. That's Bion in a nutshell. Yeah, it's all about pain. So why was he so interested in pain? I think he was so interested in pain because he was in pain and a lot of pain. And the sources of his pain were invisible to the community that he was in. People didn't understand culture or cultural dislocation. So he had to develop a theory that didn't violate what he knew, right? A theory that was capacious enough to deal with the impact of culture and cultural dislocation without really knowing it. That's exactly what he did, which I find really mind-blowing. 25. So here's what Bion had to say. So, you know, so you get the idea. Our teachers, we come to a school, there's certain ideas, and then we use them to think, right? And we produce ideas that are using these tools, right? So the first person was his ayah. She gave him India and India's spirituality, and that was he got cut off from that, right? The second person was Wilfred Trotter, which told him the groups. He studied groups. Then he went with Melanie Klein. She said the primitive. He said, okay, studied the primitive. But as he was doing that, he came up with new things that were quite sensitized to the kind of pain he was in. So he thought psychotic processes are in all of us. They can be progressive or regressive. In the progressive direction, they help dissolve certain ideas and beliefs to give way to new organizations. Remember, when you have a new idea and that the culture hasn't taken in, what do they say to you? You're crazy. Think about it. Because it's true, you are crazy. Not the idea, but you had to get out of where you were in, you had to go a little crazy. So that's progressive. On the regressive side, they attack the production of thought and of thinking to keep us from perceiving pain. Excessive attacks on thought make learning impossible, and people are stuck in dissociative states. Okay, so I'm going to do this fast. So thinking for Bion is about emotion. It's about feelings. Right? It's not an abstraction, but an act of symbolization. Emotional experience starts in the body, right? And we need to make it mental so that we can think about it and communicate it. The act of making it mental is the act of transforming a bodily experience into a symbol, which is a thought or an image. And the thought or the image is representing the lived experience, right? And then he makes a really interesting distinction between thoughts and thinking. He says thoughts impose themselves on the mind and they need a thinking apparatus. So thoughts are symbols and thinking is the process of linking those symbols in ways that make sense, that help us understand our lived experience. Yeah? And he calls that the theory of alpha function. He thinks that the mind's main job, only job, really, is to transform bits of bodily experience into representations that can be thought. And that activity is necessary to digest, metabolize, learn, and live. So the function of the mind is to deal with our emotional experience in a way that keeps us attached to people and groups. That's it. And in that way, every human being is the same, right? The contents of our mind are as different as there are groups and there are cultures. So the similarity that we all have is that we all have feelings, we all have bodies, and we all need people. And so the function of the mind is to regulate that. And then the rest is completely different between people. Good? So how do we learn to think? I'll do just one more thing, then we'll stop. How do we learn to think, to transform bodily experience into meaningful thoughts and communications? How do we learn to do that? The short answer is by being thought about. It comes from the outside, according to Bion. You're not born with the capacity to think. You're born with stuff. And then you come in contact with people who take you in and transform your bodily experience into meaningful communications. They think about you. And so when a mother thinks about its infant, the mother is using her thoughts to transform the infant's bodily communication into meaningful sequences. You get what I'm saying? See that? So he calls that alpha function. Okay, good. And then he says, how does the mother do that? What is the important thing that the mother, how does the mother do that? And he says, that we're going fast now, he says, the mother does that by dreaming. That dreaming, reverie, is the psychological function that receives bodily experience and transforms them into meaningful symbols. The dream is where the first image coheres in the mind, and the image is a symbol of some kind. It's a symbol. He suggested we use the function of reverie with our patients to dream up aspects of their emotional experience that are having difficulty being symbolized or communicated. And he warned us not to rely on memory or theory when we are doing analysis. He says, but to enter a state of negative capability, center and not knowing, and let your whole being produce a dream, a thought, a narrative from your immersion in the emotional experience of the encounter. Yeah? And does that make sense? All right. So we're going to link Bion and Burrow, and then we're going to stop. Burrow told us. Okay, let me just do it. Okay, let me just. Bion and let's link them together. They both thought that. Actually, let me see here. Okay, let me see how I'm going to do this. So they both thought that there's a unitary consciousness that we all come from. They both thought that. Okay, it comes later in Bion and changes his life. For Burrow, he says it very clearly. For Bion, it comes later. They both thought that there was a unitary consciousness that underlied everything, and that our differences are things that are necessary, but also illusory. They keep us from seeing the commonality that is between us, the unity of existence. They both had this idea, which I find really interesting. When Bion did his whole life before he reproduced the idea of a Godhead. And I thought in my thinking about it that this was the reintegration of his earliest object with Isaiah, where some of the sensibilities, the truths that were imparted, that were acquired by him, but had to be repressed, re-emerged. They re-emerged when he was 60 years old. And they changed everything beyond being, writing, what he did completely changed after he discovered O. And here's what he had to say about it. I shall use the sign O to denote that which is ultimate reality, represented by terms such as ultimate reality, absolute truth, the Godhead, the infinite, the thing in itself. O does not fall in the domain of knowledge or learning, save incidentally. It can become, but it cannot be known. It is darkness and formless, but it enters the domain of knowledge when it has evolved to a point where it can be known. Through knowledge gained by experience and formulated in terms derived from sensuous experience, its existence is conjectured phenomenologically. Yeah? Interesting, no? And he says, so, all right. So that's how Bion dealt with his cultural dislocation. He promised, David promised you that I would speak about the current events. Oh my goodness. So I'm just going to read something here. There's just a paragraph, and then, fortunately, I don't have to say much. So, Bion had one of the things I didn't talk about is that there are three primary ways that we link up with the world, that we make a connection with the world. We make links with the world by hating it, by loving it, and by trying to know it. Yeah, that's how he thinks about it. And knowing is an activity and not a product. You don't know things in memory, you know things in experience, according to him. So you do not know someone, but can always be in a process of knowing them. And in fact, every time he did a session with somebody, he emptied his mind of everything he tried, emptied his mind of everything he ever knew about them, in order to experience something or to become something that is more resonant with them. So we can distort these links leading to ignorance and arrogance, distort the links of hating, loving, and knowing. This is complicated, but just stay with me for now. Everything that we know, see, and feel is connected to an ultimate reality that we cannot know with our thoughts, but can experience directly through our bodies. This ultimate reality or Godhead is infinite, is asensuous, unknowable, like being the ground of everything we experience and know. The way to attune to it is by emptying our mind from memory and theory, adopting a not knowing open attitude, and tuning into our bodies. Yeah? So the body for Bion and Burrow was the way out of prejudice. It's an interesting idea. Yeah? Your body will empathize with pain. Your mind will denigrate the person who's in pain and not feel anything. So in order to maintain your humanity, you have to ground yourself in a certain kind of body experience and openness to the world. Otherwise, all you see are the ideas that are already in your head. Pretty interesting stuff, you know, like these people didn't go to CIIS. They didn't get the memo. They were like hanging out. And so, all right. So, and I'm going to be giving a talk, probably not, but I'm supposed to talk at Columbia in a couple of weeks about at a conference called Distortions of Reality in the Social Sphere. It's very hard to try to talk about that without really talking about Palestine. Talking about Palestine is really bad for your health these days. So I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. But anyway, the Trump people talk about populism, right? Populism. Populism they defined like treat the citizens good. Okay? That's not a problem. But then you listen to them talk. Yeah? And when we listen to them talk, they say, well, populism, we're going to have a good time together because we're going to have a lot of money. Yeah. And the money that we're going to have, we're just going to take it. We're going to take it from people that can't defend themselves. You know what I mean? We're going to go to Greenland, we're going to take it. We're going to take Ukraine, we're going to take Gaza, we're going to take the Panama Canal. We're just going to take shit, you know, because we have the power to take shit. That's called colonialism. It's fine. And last time I checked, when you take shit that's not yours by force, it's like called colonial. I don't know. But when you call it populism, what do? You distort it. You distort it. So you can get a lot of people that say yes to it because there's a lie that's built into it. Yeah? If you deport people and jail them for speaking up against the genocide like Mahmoud Khalil did, then the notion of free speech is a lie. A negative case symbol, it's a lie. You either can speak freely or you can't. So when they say free speech and you can't, it's a lie. Free speech coming from this administration is a negative case symbol that is meant to obfuscate, mangle, attack the links between us and the links within us. Most people are standing with their mouth gaping open, not knowing what to think. Most people no longer know who friend is and who foe is. Most people are paralyzed. Flood the zone at multiple velocity is what they are doing. Okay, maybe we'll talk about that after the break some more, but I just needed to say these things. Okay, I gave you more than you can digest. Please don't hate me. Just let it kind of percolate, see what stays, you know, what needs to be discarded. And we are in for a huge treat for the second half because members of your community have prepared some really interesting things to talk about and think about. So thanks, and we'll reconvene in a little bit.